We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
Nosotros crecemos cuando damos.
We grow when we give.
与えるとき成長する。
We grow when we give.
Welcome to R.O.G, Return on Generosity, a podcast celebrating generosity at work. Not financial giving, giving valuable time, alternative perspectives, and genuine collaboration.
Our special guest today is Justin Jones-Fosu, the embodiment of energy, both at home, a dedicated father to two spirited children, and at the top of the world's highest peaks, having recently conquered one of the famed 7 summits. Amazing. But Justin's passion for elevation doesn't just end with trekking. It's mirrored in his professional ascent as a captivating, and I mean captivating, business speaker, innovative social entrepreneur, and insightful workplace researcher. CEO of Work Meaningful, Justin empowers organizations on the pivotal topics of meaningful work and inclusion. He's written many books, including Your Why Matters Now, The Inclusive Mindset, and his latest thought provoker, I Respectfully Disagree, How to Have Difficult Conversations in a Divided World. His work is a compass for those seeking direction on creating connections in an often fragmented society. What I appreciate most about you, Justin, and there's a ton of things, is your contagious and positive energy. You are captivating. You crack me up. Welcome to R.O.G, Justin.
I am super excited. Thank you, Shannon.
Me too. All right, so I'd love to learn more about your background. You're from Michigan, so tell us about your upbringing.
So I like long walks on the beach, and I'm joking, even though I do.
Pina coladas.
But I grew up in Michigan, and I am a dual citizen of Ghana and United States. My dad, born and raised in Ghana, moved back there. My mom's from America. That makes me African-American. You all may get that joke tomorrow. But the interesting journey through all that is that when my parents divorced at 4, my mom, my older brother, and I were unhoused for a stint of time, and then grew up in a very challenging situation. I mean, welfare, different things. And, my mom would take us to Salvation Army before it became cool to get our clothes. And I remember she would get like a little sweater vest and bow ties because I swear she was trying to create a boys to men group. But the thing that I loved about my mom is that even through all the economic challenges that we faced, she still made sure that we experienced different, Shannon. And so we would go to Polish festivals and Hispanic Heritage Month events and Oktoberfest and First People's powwows. And we even had exchange students from France and Japan and Germany for 2 years in Brazil. And I remember one thing my mom would do. She would make us go to events that we disagreed with. And I'd be sitting there like, Mom, we don't even agree with this. We went to different faith communities. We went to mosques. All these different things. I was like, why are we doing it? And what I realized my mom was doing is that she was sharing that there's humanity on different sides of conversations. So even when we disagree, there's a human being on the other side. And I think what my mom planted in me from my experience growing up without resources, but seeing the goodness of people, by appreciating the humanity in the midst of difference, even though I strayed away from that. But I think those seeds she planted have come back to help me today.
That's amazing. And you talk about that in your TED Talk, which the link will be in the show notes. Everybody's just got to take a listen to this. You talk about don't take the exit on people, and we're going to talk more about that in our conversation today. But I'm curious about your mom. Like, where did she get that from? Like, what inspired her to raise her children in that way, do you think?
Yeah, I was curious the same way you were, Shannon. I was like, Mom, because I thought I was smart, Shannon. I was like, man, I'm really smart. I'm like, man, I'm saying stuff that's novel.
Nick.
And I was like, where did I get this from? It came from my mom. All right. And so as I interviewed my mom for my last 2 books, I asked her that same question. I was like, Mom, where did you get this from? And she shared a powerful story that I want to share with you. And it's simply this. My mom was one of the first Black female air traffic controllers in the Air Force. And she shared that there were some times she'd be stationed in Japan for 2 years. And there were some soldiers in that same 2-year time frame that never left base. And she was like, Justin, I don't want you and your brother to be like that, to never leave your metaphorical home base and not get to experience the people, cultures around you. And she considered herself a citizen of the universe. That's what she says. And so For her, it was the beauty of exploring, of learning. And I mean, even still to this day, she's excited about the jazz cruises that she takes around the world with Dave Kaz and just getting to experience the beauty of other countries. And so that's where it came from my mom.
Wow. I mean, talk about a ripple effect. This woman and her desire to raise other humans who feel like members of the universe, and then you're sharing it with us and the impact that will have on our lives. Thank you for that. In a article you wrote in June 2024, it was in Fast Company, you talked about a conversation that you had with your absent father and what that taught you about leadership and healthy confrontation. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So when the parents divorced at 4, initially was going to see my dad. I'll see my dad every other weekend, and then became one weekend a month. And then Shannon, there was 2 or 3 years where I didn't see and or hear from my dad. And when I was younger, it didn't bother me as much. Like I did feel like there was something different or off about me than many of my friends. But it didn't bother me as much as I did when I got older. And so I remember I was living in Mississippi. I was in my low 30s at the time. And it just overwhelmed me. I mean, I would pull off to the side of the road and literally just start weeping uncontrollably because I felt like I missed something and I missed out on something. Now, what I'm very clear is I've had the stories and talked to people who've grown up with both of their parents, and they didn't have perfect lives. And many of them had really challenging situations. So I'm not saying that having both of your parents are there leads to perfection. But for me, there was something missing. And so in 2019, I decided to address it, and I was going to go confront my dad, Will Smith style, right? And I'm not talking about the Chris Rock version, but I'm talking about the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air version, where in an episode his dad came back into his life, and if you all haven't seen the episode, please check out that episode. It's on YouTube, and there's an unscripted moment at the end where he falls in Uncle Phil's arms, and he's like, "Why didn't he love me?" And that's what I was going to go do. I was going to go ask my dad, "Why don't you love me? Why don't you fight for me?" He had moved back to Ghana at that time. And because I'm a really good therapist and a great leadership Charlotte cohort, they challenged me from, instead of going to confront my dad, to going and hearing his story. One of the participants in one of my learning experiences shared, she said, more eloquently than I could have, she said, "They helped you turn a confrontation into a conversation." And as I went and heard his story, I learned so much, and I still disagree with the outcome, but it allowed me to realize that sometimes we take a breath, a moment. We have community that is willing and able to challenge us, that we can turn things that could be hard, especially as leaders, because we automatically go down this autopilot of what we think we know and what we will do. And me choosing to hear his story is one of the best things I could have done, because it really challenged me in my place of empathy. It challenged me in realizing the difference between intent and impact. And it challenged me about forgiveness. And in choosing to forgive my dad, not because he asked for it, but because it was my choice, what I didn't realize I was holding back was a whole aspect of my Ghanaian heritage that was not a part of my life growing up. And in that moment of forgiveness, what washed over me was that heritage, and it's inspired things now in terms of how I dress, in terms of the types of suits I wear, foundation we started. We're building a school in Ghana, almost done with it. I take people to Ghana once a year. All these things that would never have happened had it not been for respectful disagreement.
Unbelievable. Thank you so much for sharing that. What were some of the things that you kept front of mind when you were having this conversation? Because you're humans. There's no doubt that there were things that were hard to hear, or, even just being in that face-to-face, eyeball to eyeball. Like, how did you keep yourself centered?
Yeah. I was saying things that I didn't realize would be a part of I respectfully disagree, one of the pillars around being a student, right? And so that's our pillar 2. And
Yes.
being a student, you approach it with a perspective of listening and learning rather than lecturing. And Shannon, I wanted to go and lecture my dad. I want to go and tell him how hard it had been. I want to go and tell him what I felt and the abandonment that was there, and things that subsequently came forward because of feeling rejected and all of these things. But when I chose to be a student, and I kept saying, "Justin, there's something for you to learn. There's something for you," even while he's talking, "Justin, there's something for you to learn." Because this time I want to jump in, but wait a minute,
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. Yes. Like, but
Right. But when you're a student, you listen away to grasp
yeah,
it. For me, it's not even about just listening, it's comprehending, it's understanding, and it's facilitating it through your own experience. And so as he was engaging, I kept on saying things like, tell me more, right? Or tell me about that. And so I was determined to ask way more questions than I would in sharing how I felt. And I think that helped me to better uncover his story so that it led me to a place of seeking common ground, but also having a sense of empathy for my dad and his own experience and coming to the conclusions that he did the best he could with what he had based upon the experiences that he had growing up and what he thought would be best for me.
so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. That is courage at its capital C, because that's your ability to listen and, like you said, to deeply comprehend on a level that is not like, I don't think we naturally react to things that way, right? Because we have the fight or flight, and where it's scary, and you either want to like show him why he was wrong or get the heck out of there. But you stuck it out, and then you decided to not only leverage that for your own knowledge and like, who am I and how do I want to show up, but you packaged it in a way that now we can benefit from it when you talk about how we can disagree with people in a respectful way. So I really want to learn more about your thought leadership. One of the things that you talk about is the power of three. So please share with our listeners your thoughts on the power of three.
First, if you don't mind me can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
What stood out to you about the power of three? What caused it to be a question you wanted to ask?
Honestly, I'm looking through my notes because I was more prepped last week than I am today. It showed up in your TED Talk.
Yeah.
I don't know. I watched so much of your video, I can't remember where it came from. But you talked about the power of three, and I often think like three is a number of things you can remember without a list, and the Trinity is three, and
Yes.
Three Musketeers, and
Right.
all like there's like the three is triangles. So anyway, I thought of it whenever I learned about it, I wrote it in my list of questions for you, but I don't
Yes.
remember
I
where it
love
came
it.
from.
So essentially, I could have played this out further, right? Essentially, what I just did was the power of one. All right. Now,
Okay.
if I wanted to go deeper, if we had longer time for the podcast, I would be like, oh, so has three always been something significant for you? Right. And
Uh-huh.
power of two. Right. And then you've told me a different story about how you grew up and how three, or, your faith and different things. I was like, oh, wow. Like, when did you come to faith? And it would have led into a deeper level of conversation. And that's the power
Okay.
of three. Is that oftentimes what we found in our research is that in a very distracted world, we don't do deep listening anymore. Right? It's canned responses. We're just talking to talk instead of deeply listening. And so the power of three is simply, will we choose to listen at least to the third level of the conversation? Right? So instead of jumping in, we're challenging the double Dutch style of communication where you're waiting to jump in, right?
Yes.
My
We have to
turn,
get to that.
right?
That's it. We have to get there.
My turn.
Yes. Yeah.
And oftentimes what we found is that it's not that people are narcissists or are self-absorbed. The majority of people aren't. It's that we're trying to find connections, right? And in our desire to find connections, we do something very challenging that we sometimes end up taking control of people's stories. I even saw yesterday, and again, very well-meaning. After church, we had a community group, and right now we're going through and we're sharing people's stories, right? It's just people that came to faith and all these kind of things. And what was interesting for me was somebody shared their story, and immediately there were certain people in the group that automatically started sharing their story based upon that person's story. And I was doing my best, like, oh, no, I mean, obviously, there's grace because I know this word, right? And I'm like, after they got done, she answered, I was like, hey, do you mind if I ask you a question? And she was like, yeah. And I started asking questions that were deeper to her story. The reason I bring that up is there's nothing wrong with the people who started sharing their story. It was their moment of finding connection. But we know what's interesting in this, Shannon, is that as I was observing her, it's like, wow, I just shared this really vulnerable, powerful, interesting story, and automatically it turns into somebody else's story. And that's what we do as people.
Yeah.
Instead of diving deeper into people, we end up taking control. And so if somebody was like, hey, I give you a benign thing, right? Like, oh my gosh, like I went to this really great seafood restaurant. And somebody jumps in, oh, you did? But have you been to this one? Rather than and appreciate that person's
What did you
excitement.
order? Yeah.
Yes, or what made it the most amazing seafood restaurant for you, right?
Yeah.
And then diving in deeper. And so those
Yes.
are some practical things. And so when you're talking to people, I encourage you to think in the power of 3, especially when you're in those places of disagreement, because there might be something more you can learn.
Like you just shared about your story with your father, and you tell me more, right? You're deepening, like, because you could take it at surface level as that's more information that I had than when I got here, but it wasn't, there was more to it. There's a reason for everything. So you were curious to learn. So I think the curiosity is really at the core of that. And like you talked about empathy and like genuinely wanting to know, like, what's it like to be you in your shoes, right? So you started to talk about double Dutch.
Yes.
I love this concept so much. Please share with our listeners. I'm like picturing, I love the way you model it too on stage. It's brilliant. So tell us about double Dutch communication.
Yeah. So for those who don't know double Dutch, so it's a form of jumping rope, right? And so a single rope is like just one rope, whoosh, whoosh. Double Dutch are 2 ropes, like whoosh, 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 and somebody waiting to jump in, and it's like this really hard dance to jump in. But once you jump in, you're like, all right. And that's how we often communicate with people. We're waiting to jump in, like take a breath, take a pause, take a breath, and this is why I disagree with you, right? Or this is what I know, or this is my story. And what if instead of waiting to jump in, what if we were more curious? What if we dove in deeper? What if we asked more questions? And if we didn't know what to ask, the classic line, the 3 power words we say is tell me more. Because unfortunately in our society, we've conditioned people that we really don't care about your story. And that's why I really believe that most people speak in surface level, because most people don't really care. And we've told people we don't really care. So when we ask, how are you doing? We actually just expect somebody to say good and keep moving, right? Rather than to give a very thoughtful, honest response about how they're doing. Hear me on this. We may not have time to hear everybody how they're doing, right? And so, let's change our questions. Good to see you, right? It's not a question. It's just a greeting, right? Because we may not have the opportunity to really dive in, but I try my best in asking how people are doing or how was your weekend, that it really is, I had the time to genuinely hear. And so when somebody's like, oh yeah, I had a good weekend, I was like, oh, what was good about it? And they're like, wait a minute, like you're asking a deeper question?
Yeah.
So that is the challenging of double Dutch of our communication.
Brilliant. Everybody's just got to watch this TED Talk and follow you on socials to get the visual here, because it's very relatable, and it's having that patience to hear. I mean, very often we ask a question and sometimes we even answer it, right? Yeah. We're especially if it's a good question that people have to like, I don't have to think about that. And then we tell them, what about this? And what about that? Right? And so like, why bother asking them? Yeah. I think we do that for a lot of reasons. My beliefs are that, we're impatient and sometimes we aren't sure they're going to get to the right answer. So we try to help them. And we're also uncomfortable with silence. So we try to fill it. But I think your advice and counsel for us to just be patient and really listen curiously is brilliant. So in your book, you talk about these 5 pillars of bridging the divide in our next disagreement. So it's not like if you're going to have a disagreement, we're all going to have disagreements. You're saying when we have those, here are some of the pillars of the ways that we could disagree in a respectful way. Your first one is to challenge your perspective. Can you please tell us more about that?
Yeah, so challenge your perspective was the last pillar added, but what we didn't realize was the most foundational pillar to this work. And it's because as we started diving into the research around articles and books on respectful disagreement or civil conversations and all these kind of things, most of them started with the actual disagreement. It was, when you're in the disagreement, here are some things to do. Here's how you breathe. Here's how you challenge your fight or flight. Here are things to do to honor the other person. Here are some things. And what we didn't see, which we thought was pivotal, was what my mom did for me. And it's before any disagreement even occurs. How are we challenging our perspective? How are we using those muscles so that when we get into disagreement, it's not like our world is shattered because we've already heard things that were contrary to what we believe, to what we think, to how we think the world operates. And it's not an abnormal thing, but I think when people don't have moments where their perspective is constantly challenged, then those arguments, those disagreements end up becoming more highlighted than they had to be. And so for me, challenging your perspective and give you a strategy behind it, because it's not just theoretical. Challenging your perspective is something as simple as what I tell leaders is moving from an open door policy to an out the door policy. And when you move to an out the door policy, you are more proactive. Open door, hey, if you need me, Shannon, I'm here. That's reactive. I'm putting the onus on you. If I'm the leader, the onus is on me. I'm going to go to you. I'm going to hear your story, your perspective. And one way to do that is what we call 1MC/W, which is one meaningful connection per week, where you choose to listen to the stories of other people. You ask about them. What brought you to our company? What brought you to our country? What brought you to our organization? What brought you to our neighborhood, right? And if that's too much, then flip W upside down and make it one meaningful connection per month. But the key thing here is that you have to put it in your calendar. Because if you don't, life will just continue as normal. That's why I love James Clear's Atomic Habits. Like these little small things. What if you just built into your calendar once a week, 15 to 20 minutes, to have a meaningful conversation with someone that you normally haven't had? Or maybe an hour long for a month. But that's one way to challenge our perspective. And that's preventative work, so that when we get into these disagreements, our muscles have already been exercised. It's almost like going and running a marathon, but you've never trained. That's what challenging your perspective is about. It's helping you to train.
So good. I love that. And I've got a million questions that I have about that, but I'm going to control myself. Here's something that I need to challenge my perspectives on, and I think you're the perfect person to help me. DEI. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, belonging. It's something that it's always mattered. It's always been a part of how we operate in the world. In 2020, things got even more heightened with the murder of George Floyd. And then it seemed like, at least in America, people were really like, yeah, this does matter. And we need to be more, we have to challenge our preconceived notions and what have you. And now it's under attack in a way that I find really strange. Curious to get your thoughts. How are you? I mean, you're a DEI practitioner, right? You're somebody who talks about inclusion and belonging. How are you interpreting all of that?
Yeah. So the first, I'd say, like, I am not a DEI practitioner. I am an employee experience person. And part of the employee experience is creating a place where people feel seen, safe, and can bring their full selves to work, which is, for me, inclusion. Yeah. And it's every day, right? And so I was an accidental diversity person. And it's because I was voluntold to be a part of the diversity committee over 20 years ago for this top financial firm. And you can tell why, because I'm bald. And the interesting thing is, even all of that is, I learned the wrong way to do it, and a way that wasn't really making impact. And that was one that was at times full of shame, one that at times was full of blame, one that at times was just about the big three in terms of race, gender, and identity. And I was just, as a person who's observant, right? I'm my top strengths finder is strategy, strategic. And so I see patterns. And as I would look amongst the audience and see participants in these sessions that I was leading or not leading, and I was like, there's resistance here. So I started having conversations. And I started asking, like, what are you feeling? What are you thinking? And people opened up and they were like, hey, like, I feel like I'm being blamed. Like, I'm told, like, dirt, or, things that happened in past history are my fault, and, all these things. And it challenged me in many different ways to approach this from a radically different way. And now, again, this is just but one approach, because many approaches can be helpful for different people. But I felt this piece missing is that we challenged three things. Number one is that when I talk about diversity, I'm talking about all of us. Every single one of us is part of diversity. It's not just the big three, right? It's not race, gender, and identity. It's right, what background is it? What political party? What religious background? All these things, because diversity at its simplest form just means difference. Mm-hmm. Number two, I wasn't approaching it from a shame-based perspective. It was more of an inspiring of where can we be, rather than it's 2024 and you still struggle with, right? Or 2025 and right? Versus like, hey, I still struggle with stuff. I still say the wrong things. I still think wrong thoughts. And it's a part of my growth journey. Something that I'm learning and lean in. And so it's aspirational for me of where I can go. And number three, I wanted it to be very much more strategic. Because if I think about all the places that I suck at being and showing up for people, Shannon, it can get overwhelming, right? It's just like this thing's coming at me. And so I started asking, all right, each year, what's an area can I grow? Where's a topic or an area? How do I support women in the workplace in deeper ways? And let me learn about the pay gap. And the pay gap is very different depending on the race of the women. Like all of these different things. And so it became more strategic. And I just realized I can't accomplish it all. I can't in this year focus on those who have disabilities, focus on women, focus on things of identity, think of this, because I wouldn't do anything. And the bonus thing of this is I had to realize there are some things that I also disagree with, and that's okay. And this is the thing, we almost felt like everything that was shared, we had to accept and embrace, and it became a part of our character. There are things that people talk about in the diversity and inclusion space that I disagree with. And I had to tell people, like, it's not about just accepting and embracing, and that's almost what we made it. It's about having honest conversations, being able to operate in the gray space of hearing other people's perspectives and learning. And it's shaped and molded, and I got the humanity of people. And those are some of the things that I felt weren't being done well. And so that's what I began doing. And I started warning people over a decade ago, is that if we continue in this vein, where you just sit down, shut up, and listen to what we have to say, what ends up going to happen is that at some point somebody's going to say, no more. I'm not going to sit down and shut up. And so, unfortunately, I've had many people in our sessions come up and say, wow, this is the first time that I actually felt included in an inclusion conversation.
Huh. Wow.
And that initially was a badge of honor for me, but then it made me very sad because I realized that if I'm hearing this, how much more is actually hurting the work that's being done. And so that became the emphasis there. Now, I'm going to say something very challenging for a moment. In 2020, a lot happened. And unfortunately, people started to go where the money was. And so people who had no business talking about diversity and inclusion started talking about diversity and inclusion because they saw companies were buying it. They saw people were interested in it, and they would read a book and watch an article or watch a video and then create these moments where I can talk about diversity and inclusion. They were actually hurting the real work that was being done. And so I can speak in the gray space, and I'll be quiet here, but the gray space is really sad. Some colleagues, many colleagues who have been impacted by it. And whether you agree with what's happening or not, you can have empathy for people's lives and the lives of their family. Seeing companies that you're starting to say, we can tell it was really about more because it was popular, not because you really believed in it. But the last thing I'll say is that I think and I believe that there should and has to have been a reform to how diversity and inclusion is talked about. That not everything that was being shared is good for us. And like anything, it needed to have some aspects of being reformed. But it didn't mean that it needed to be eradicated. And so when people say, I don't like diversity, my first question is to them, Shannon, well, how do you define it?
Yeah. And see where they go from there.
100%. Yeah. Because that's the starting point, because we're having different conversations. And that's the point, right?
The
of like,
association is all over the place.
Yeah. That's what do you mean by it? Yes.
One of the ways that you do it is to, it sounds so obvious, but you include everyone in the conversation and you enable people to share their own experiences and be vulnerable and that type of thing. Is there other best practices, or when you see it done right, ways that you view are effective? What are some of the best practices there?
Yeah. And I want to be very clear. For me, I'm talking a lot about interpersonal conversations, connections, things like that. I have friends who deal with the systems of things. That's a whole different conversation. That's not my specialty or area.
I got you.
But me, how do I engage with the everyday person, right? How do I make it So we call it the mindset, the inclusive mindset. How do we make this a mindset? One part of making this a mindset is that we do things that are habit forming. And so encouraging people when we're talking about diversity and inclusion is ask, how am I making this a habit in my life? Right? So part of the habit thing for me is the Circles of Grace Challenge, where every 6 to 12 months, I go to events, experiences, or I engage with people in either which I don't know a lot about and or I disagree with. And I build that into the habit of my life so that I'm consistently and constantly learning, right? Number 2 is to be vulnerable. So many times I've been in sessions where people approach this from, you all need to get this together. And I can't believe we're still struggling with it. And even if it's not intentional that way, I tell my audiences and participants, it's like, hey, let me tell you something I currently still struggle with. And so I think one piece that can be missing at times in these sessions and opportunities is how are we helping people to themselves be vulnerable by us who are facilitating the conversation? First, being vulnerable, not the honorable vulnerability of like, I got over that 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But I
right.
still struggle with this now.
Now. Yes.
And those are things that can help. So 2 things could be, I'll give you a list of 10, but 1 is make it habit forming. And 2 is it to be vulnerable. Lastly, I'll give you the bonus, is to show how this applies to all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Show how it applies to all of it. Unless you're doing a very specific area, right? Like you're training on gender and how gender impacts organizations, or you're training on, right? But still talk about not only that gender, but how it impacts all of us. Guess what I started to do? The left hand. I didn't know that left-handed people lived a different life than I did, Shannon. I had no idea. I started digging into research and realized that pens were the bane of some people's existence, and markers and scissors that say they're multi-handed are still made for right-handed people, that our society mainly is catered to right-handed individuals.
Yep.
And I didn't realize until I started having stories. Yes.
Yeah, everything.
Right? Hearing people, and I started doing this research, and guess what I found out? My son was left-handed. Didn't even know yet. And I remember at soccer practice, you talk about what this is what people think is diversity and inclusion. Soccer practice. My son is struggling in soccer shots. Guess why? I didn't know. Coach was saying, put your right foot on the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Kick with your right foot. Do all these things right. And it hit me. It's like, he's struggling because he's left-handed. I went to the coach and said, hey, my son is left-handed. And again, he's just starting. I think in soccer you should be do both,
yeah,
right?
He's trying
and when you're
out.
just starting, I was like, can you ask him to use his left hand or his left foot or kick with left? And he started soaring. Now he wants to be a footballer. But it was that one small moment of inclusion where I went and became an advocate for my son to say, now you may say, oh, Justin, that's great because it's your son. Let me give you another quick example. So guess what I do now when I go and I do trainings and I have to bind the notebooks? I do top binding because I learned from left-handed people that left binding made it challenging for them to write. And it was a challenging experience. So do I want them challenged while I'm speaking? No, I want them learning. And so we had one conference that adopted that for their whole conference, had over 2,000 people. And they put a little page that said, this is why the conference workbook is now top bound. Because of the small mode of inclusion. These are these moments that we're lumping all together with stuff that might need to be reformed, but these are also moments of inclusion.
And it benefits everyone, to your point. It's so great to challenge our perspective. That's your first pillar. You're saying it's foundational, fundamental. We have to challenge our perspective. So when we're disagreeing with something, it's helpful to first go inward and say, like, why do I think that's wrong? What bothers me about that, right? So then you're saying number 2 is be the student, and you demonstrated that really well. You talked about how you were the student in your conversation with your father. Number 3 is cultivate your curiosity. And I'd love, you've been talking about it throughout our conversation, but to just hit this one squarely, tell us more about cultivating our curiosity.
Yeah, it's when we fill in the gaps with conclusions, right? Rather than curiosity, we're not cultivating our curiosity. And often our brains work that way, where it wants to make a quick decision, a quick fix. I see people with maroon sweaters. I'm like, I remember 5 years ago, somebody smacked me against my bald head. So I'm watching you, Shannon. You had that maroon sweater, right? And it may have been called Maroon 5, right?
Right.
But
If I could sing.
but the interesting thing is that, I love this statement, right? We make it's like curiosity killed the cat. And I'm like, no, it wasn't curiosity that killed the cat. Conclusions did.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the interesting phenomenon of our brains
Yeah.
is that our brains want to immediately go to information that we stored from second and third hand information rather than asking more questions. Like when somebody says, I hate diversity, I think we need to get rid of it. Instead of immediately attacking that person, like, I can't believe you don't like diversity. I've been studying for 20 years. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, how do you define diversity?
Mm-hmm.
Because we might be saying the same thing.
Yeah.
And
we
might not
agree. Yeah. Right.
Right.
You're curious. You wonder.
Sure.
What's their viewpoint? Where are they coming from? What's influencing their point of view? I mean, was it their objective to come in here and shut something down? So they're just saying what they have to say to achieve an outcome, or is it what they really believe? I think it's so important to ask more questions, seek to understand.
And their story, right? And that's the other piece that we sometimes miss is that our stories shape how we show up in our ideological formation, right? Were they passed over for a promotion and they felt it was because it was a diversity hire, right?
Yeah.
And that could have been their perception, right? Or for some companies, they did that nonsense, right? Where it's like, oh, we need to fill a quota, so let's pull it. Let's do it. And that stuff happened, right? I'm a person that's going to give it how it really is. It doesn't happen as often as people think it did, but that stuff did happen because people felt guilty or shame versus saying, why don't we widen the talent pool? Let me give you a great example of this because I love when people go in these conversations, right? So I planned on at one point becoming a professor in business, and I had gone to the PhD project, and it's a great organization that helps prepare African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans to get their PhDs. And why did this come about? Because what they found was KPMG time found that they were not getting a lot of underrepresented candidates in accounting. And they were unsure why. They were like, we're doing the recruiting, we're going to different colleges, we're going to different clubs, we're going to HBCUs, we're doing all these things. Why are we getting it? And what they found as they dug deep into the research, because they're consulting, is that people would come in and they'd be like, oh, I want to be an accountant. And then they wouldn't see themselves in the front of the classroom. And so they would switch majors to other majors where they might have seen somebody who could be a mentor to them or who looked like them or who was a person that they could say, oh, I can see a path forward in this area. And they were like, we're doing it the wrong way. Instead of focusing on recruitment, what if we helped to put other people in the classroom that could help them continue their journey? And so when they started, I think at that time, it was no more than 2% of PhDs at accredited institutions of business were African-American, Latino, and or Native American. And I don't know what the numbers are now, but when I went through it at the time, it was 14%. And they started seeing more students to engage. Like those are moments where those weren't diversity hires, right?
Yeah.
Those were moments where people weren't exposed to a wider spectrum of people who could be there. And that's a moment that we can sometimes lose sight of. And so in cultivating our curiosity, we have to first ask, are we actually even defining these things the same way? Like even if I respectfully disagree, we had to really define what we called respect, because what I mean by respect was very different than how sometimes society determines respect. So that's cultivating our curiosity, is choosing to be curious and get to a place of understanding where I'm asking, how do you understand this in ways that we can have the same conversation?
Right. And don't assume you already know. And check your story.
And our brains think that, right? Our brains immediately jump to, I heard X, that means X, right? We call it the dotted line dilemma, right? And so sometimes in our learning experiences, I'll ask real quick, and I want to do this with you real quick, Shannon. And all those who are listening or watching, I want you to answer real quick, out loud too, right? Don't think about it. All right, let's go, Shannon. All right, so Shannon, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Answer real quick. Okay. What's the correct side of the road to drive on? Go.
In the United States on the right.
You're thinking too wrong. See, I can tell You were
I was just like,
processing the filtering, right? And that's how I do it. That's why I tell you, don't pause, don't think about it,
right.
because your brain was
Yeah.
like, wait a minute, does he
Because I
mean
would say the
here?
right where I
Yeah,
live. Yeah. But
right.
it's true because when you travel in Europe, people say they're driving on the wrong side of the road.
Yes,
Isn't that hilarious? It's like, it's not
it
the
is.
wrong side of the road. It's the other side of the road, right?
Hey, but
Yeah.
that's what our brains do. We call it the dotted
Yeah.
line dilemma. It
Yeah.
fills in the gaps and says, this is that, and it's based on our context. I was talking
Yeah.
to a podcast in Australia, and they were like, a left. I was like, why? They were like, this the safest side. I was like, would you drive on the left in these states? They were like, the United States needs to change the side of the road they drive. All right. So,
And the
yeah.
roundabouts, those are the worst. Those are the hardest, right? Oh my gosh. So your pillar 4 is to seek the gray, and pillar 5 is agree to respect, or rather than agree to disagree. I love how you flip it and you say agree to respect, and you just said how you define that in your book. So everybody just need to pick up your book, because I want to leave time for rapid fire questions. I
Yes.
think you're going to be amazing at this.
Okay, let's
All
just
right. Okay. So my first question is, you love to move and dance. What's one of your favorite songs?
gotta be feeling something. Got to be feeling something. Wanna get over it, yeah, yeah. Got to get over it, yeah, yeah. Wanna get over it, yeah, yeah. Up and get on it, yeah, yeah. All right. I'm a
I lo-
basketball. I don't know. I don't even know if
I'm
he
like a
says that.
yeah, totally. Best or worst advice you've ever been given?
Do you, boo, is the worst advice. Do you, boo. No, it's the worst advice because it's, we're in a world of other people. I can't just do me. How is doing me impacting others?
Yeah. What do you do for fun?
I hike. I hike around the world. I hike once a year. It's part of my self-care. Just did a 12-mile hike this past Saturday, getting ready for Iceland, a 4-day backpacking trip. But it's led me to climb Kilimanjaro, Machu Picchu, Patagonia, Grand Canyon, Lost City Trek in Colombia, and hopefully Everest Base Camp in 2026.
Wow. And what is it about hiking that you love so much?
The challenge, it's an achievement hobby. My first book, Your Why Matters Now, part of the research is how do people achieve more? And one of those things is there's a carryover effect when we have achievement hobbies or actually able to accomplish something, and we get a physiological boost in other aspects of our lives. And so that's number one. Number two, when you're walking or hiking for like 9 miles a day, sometimes it causes you to think deeply and especially undistracted. Right. So I normally, I don't listen to music. Some people do. Sometimes I'm talking to people. Sometimes and I learn so much about myself during those hikes that I usually come back refreshed. And so people say, why, you just backpacked for 36 miles and it was self-care? And it's like, yes, it was a mental self-care because think differently. So that's what it does for me.
Oh, that's amazing. So speaking of that, what's a daily habit that you have that you think enables you to live such an amazing life?
So I have two, and one of those, I have this whole model called 5SC squared about self-care. And the first one I did was fitness. And so I do something fitness related every single day, right? It could be a walk at the gym, ride on my Peloton, whatever. And the one that was last year become a habit is read a scripture. I do my devotions each and every single day. Last year I was probably like 96%. I missed a couple of days and then went back and got them. And what I'm leaning into starting this year is read for 5 minutes. And I really want to get to this place. I saw a study a long time ago about reading for 30 minutes and how transformative that is every single day. James Clear, Atomic Habits. Well, let me start with 5 minutes versus starting with 30. So that's something I'm leaning into.
Let it evolve from there. My gosh, that's incredible. What's one thing that you most easily delight in?
My kids. Yeah.
Your kid.
I love being a daddy. I love dancing with them, playing with them, being an imperfect dad. I make a lot of mistakes. I often have to apologize to my kids, but I think that my lack of relationship with my dad really inspired me to really be present and as best as I can for my kids. And when I get off the path, that I get back on it really quick.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing, right? That's so human, because we're never going to get it right all the time, but how quickly can we notice that we're there and snap back?
Yeah.
What never fails to make you laugh?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think I always laugh at just dancing in the gym.
Dancing in
So
the gym.
I go to the gym and I dance
Uh-huh.
and I'm lifting weights and like, some guys like, man, you lifting heavy weights, and then you all of a sudden you just start like pop blocking.
Rocking it.
He's like, I was like, I'm looking at you, man, this guy's really strong. And then I'm just like, ooh, ooh, ooh. And he was like, yeah, he's like, I just start laughing. So it's fun because one of my joys is bringing a smile to other people each and every day. And so that's the mission of every day.
You are so good at it. And so I just want to end with thank you because, another Justinism. Thank you because you are such a radiant light. I just want you to keep shining bright at anything I can do to help amp that light up. I just adore you, and thank you for sharing that with us.
Well, thank you so much, Shannon. I want to thank you because that I can, one, tell you did a lot of amazing research because you knew a lot of the stuff. Number two, that your heart cares deeply about this and just the kindred spirits that we have and the work that you're doing. And I do have to give credit where credit is due. Thank you because came from the amazing Shan Zhao, Stanford professor, Stanford PhD, who started asking, I wonder how we can fully acknowledge people. And the thank you because became a fully acknowledgement thing that she brought forward from improv. And it came from yes and. So instead of just saying thank you because, or just thank you or that's stupid, thank you because this was such an amazing time for me to be on here and to share with your people. And so I do want to give her that credit, Shan Zhao. Thank you because.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to R.O.G, Return on Generosity podcast. Please help us grow by subscribing and reviewing us on your favorite podcast player. And for more information, visit bridgebetween.com. We grow when we give.
우리는 나누면서 성숙합니다.
We grow when we give.
On rayonne quand on donne.
We grow when we give.